Hello, thank you all so much for being with us. My name is Casey Farrell-Snyder. I am the director of the Center for Women and Gender Equity and the co-director of the Center for Violence Prevention Education at BGSU. Today, we have some great guests with us to talk about our new Vice President, Kamala Harris. We are so excited to chat about our Vice President, Kamala Harris, the first woman and first woman of color into this role of Vice President of the United States. And our program today, being the first, but making sure you are not the last, is presented by the Center for Women and Gender Equity and part of the the Division of Diversity and Belonging. Our roundtable participants today are Dr. Melissa Miller. She is an expert on American politics with a specific focus on elections and voting behavior, women in American politics, public opinion in the media. She teaches courses in American government, political parties, voter behavior, women in American politics, and research methods. In 2016, Dr. Miller was named Master Teacher, which is the highest teaching award on campus. Dr. Kathleen Kollman completed her PhD in American Culture Studies at Bowling Green State University in 2020, so congratulations. Recent accomplishment, that's great. She's currently serving as a lecturer of English at The Ohio State University. Her research focuses on representations of gender in film, television, literature, and other popular culture texts. Dr. Kollman is working on turning her dissertation, If She Were President, Fictional Representations of Female US Presidents in Film, Television, and Literature, into a monograph. And Dr. Lisa E. DeBose is a duly certified human resources administrator with nearly 3 decades of experience in public and private sector industries. She is currently employed as Director of Human Resources for Employee Relations and Professional Development at Bowling Green State University, where she also earned her EDD in Leadership Studies. She has instructed as an adjunct at 2 universities, which include teaching for the past 2 summers, an accelerated master's level strategic human resources course for the Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. So thank you all so much for being here for our roundtable discussion. I'm really excited to hear from all of you and hear your perspectives. So we're going to kind of dive right in here if we could. My first question, and I'm going to ask all of you to answer, and Dr. Kollman, if you could start and share what your initial reaction was when you found out that a woman was nominated for the VP slot and or that there was a woman VP elect. So think back in your memory.
Yeah, it was very exciting. I really didn't think that would happen. I was finishing my dissertation on a similar topic right as the last woman who was still running for president dropped out of the race. I was literally finishing the last few bits of my manuscript that day that she dropped out. So to find out that Kamala had been picked as Joe Biden's VP choice, I was delighted. And then to have them actually win, I was also delighted. But again, I was surprised. All of my research was indicating that things were not necessarily going to go in that direction for this election cycle, because historically we've had a lot of trouble getting women past a certain point in that process. And even though women have made it all the way to even the top of the ticket as a party nominee, a major party nominee, no woman had yet actually won the Electoral College. So it was a sense of both joy and relief, and also, man, I'm going to have to revise a lot of stuff now in my work, but I'm happy to do that. I think it's a great reason to do that. So yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Miller.
Yeah, I actually have 2 responses. The first was when Joe Biden named Kamala Harris to be his VP nominee, which happened in August. I wasn't surprised. And I think that's kind of a cool thing, that in fact, there has been some normalization of women on a presidential ticket running for president. There had been 2 prior nominees for vice president on a major party ticket. And there had been a weeks-long Veep stakes that I'd been following closely. Joe Biden had signaled that he would name a woman all the way back in March during a debate with Bernie Sanders. So I wasn't surprised. It was more like, oh, okay, good pick. I immediately went to my political science brain. Okay, what does she bring to the ticket, et cetera, et cetera. But then fast forward to the Saturday after the election, which was the day that it became clear and was basically announced in the media that the Biden-Harris ticket had won. I was driving with my teenage son, and I suddenly got this chill, and I turned to my son and I said, I don't know if you understand what a big deal this is. We have our first woman vice president. I started pumping my arm, and my teenage son said, Mom, you need to calm down or we're going to have to pull over. So for me, it was a little bit of a delay, but a real sense of the historic nature and a real turning of the page in women's political history in the United States.
Thank you, Dr. DuBose.
Yes, I mirror what my colleagues have stated. The level of excitement that I had was significant. It's significant in a variety of different ways. It's significant because now there was representation of someone who looked like me. As a woman, as a Black woman, and as a researcher whose study was on the experiences of leadership advancement of African American women, it told a different story. And just like my colleague said, the information that I had gleaned over the time period where I was doing my research showed something else, because that's what history dictated. But this was a time of a shift, of a change during such an uprising of social injustice related issues. And so the excitement had many layers of it for me. But of course, key is representation is everything. When you have someone of a diverse background that looks different than what we had typically been seeing over the centuries that we have existed in this country, it tells us that there is acceptance. So my initial feeling was that of excitement. And then as a person of color who have experienced certain types of discrimination and who has, as a human resources professional, investigated those types of discriminatory behaviors toward people that didn't look like the majority, I also had a little bit of fear. What is this going to mean for the ticket? Will this ticket be allowed to actually push forward and win? And will there be additional threats that may not have been a consideration if a male had been selected for this position? And so I let that fear be overcome by the joy and excitement to say, you know what, it's a new day and we have to be a part of this continuation of change through conversations just like this. And so it's important for us to continue to talk about, yes, we can, yes, we are, yes, we will. And then the third element is that I happen to be in the same sorority as Kamala Harris. So as a senator and now as the vice president, she is my sorority sister. So I am very happy to be able to state that as well, but it's very meaningful. And I believe it's going to assist in helping to change the dynamic and the fabric of how we move forward in our country.
Thank you all so much. So Harris talks a lot about those who have come before her and how important they have been to paving the way for her. She's also said that although she's the first, she will not be the last woman or woman of color in this position, and that we had a nod to her in our presentation title. Why do you think it's taken so long for a woman to be in one of the highest positions of government? And why do you think we still have not seen a woman in the highest position? So Dr. DuBose, do you mind starting, and then Dr. Miller?
Absolutely. Well, we all know the research that is surrounding the glass ceiling. And when it comes to women in the workplace and how there's this impenetrable wall or ceiling that exists that says you can see what's out there for you, but we're not going to allow you to break through that ceiling to achieve it. So that barrier is something that's real. There's entire commissions that have done research about it. The Federal Glass Ceiling Commission is one of them. And there's significant research on the Department of Labor website that talks about these trends. Now, when it comes to a woman of color, there's an additional element that is of concern, which is called the concrete ceiling. So with the glass ceiling, you see it, but you can't attain it, or there's significant barriers. With the concrete ceiling, what it's stating is we don't know about it, we don't hear about it, and the intent is for us not to achieve that. So that's the precursor of all of the types of barriers that have existed that prohibited women and women of color from advancing. So as we move forward down the continuum of what's happened in our government, there were laws that were put into place to try to abate those issues. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is one of them. And that's Title VII, where it really addresses any kind of marginalization and making sure that there's an entity that is reviewing those kinds of cases that are coming forward at no cost to those individuals that are feeling as if they're impeded. So we're beyond 50 years with that law, but guess what? We're still facing the same thing. So the history of our country has said, no, you women need to stay in a particular place. You can't have too much ambition. It's okay if you have this level of position, but not this senior level position. It's great for you to be support, maybe beside, but not ahead. And that's not true. We have to catch up with what other countries have done and how they've had women in senior leadership roles running countries and making a huge difference. We're a superpower. So our superpowers have to be advanced by understanding that we are able, we are capable, we are knowledgeable, and we are forces to be reckoned with. And if we're at the table, we bring an entirely different discussion and element that helps us move forward. So it has hindered in the past, but every time we make an advancement, it chips away at that ceiling that's glass and that ceiling that's concrete. And we're going to keep chipping away at it.
If I can just tag along on everything that Dr. DeBose said, and also add that everything that's true in the workforce, there's been a sort of a companion thread of research among gender scholars in political science and in women's studies that those very same barriers have been present for women. Just to put this in historical context, the first woman to run for president was Victoria Woodhull, who was born in tiny Homer, Ohio. And she ran for president in 1872 as the nominee of the Equal Rights Party. She was famously caricatured in a political cartoon by Thomas Nast as literally the devil. We could do a whole hour, we could do a whole days on women's treatment in the press who've run for president. But let me just underscore, that's quite a long wait until 2020 for the first woman to be elected vice president. And what scholars who've looked specifically at politics have found is, number one, sexism. For generations, women were simply not viewed as presidential. They were not viewed as fit to serve as president of the United States. The office of president of the United States is the most masculinized elective office probably in the world. And the traits that people associate with it are strength, decisiveness, authority. These are not stereotypically feminine traits. Stereotypically feminine traits are things like compassion and empathy and caring. And that's not historically what Americans have been looking for in their president. So there has just been plain outright sexism among voters. Now that of course has been chipped away at in the feminism's first wave. In the second wave, a lot of progress had been made and women began to enter elective office in greater number, but still that highest glass or concrete ceiling had not been broken. And there's some additional reasons why we have yet to see a woman as president. One is that there just aren't so few women in the pipeline. We think of those stepping stone positions to the office of vice president or the office of president, and they are sitting US senator, sitting member of Congress, governor of a key state. And when you think that even as we sit here today, women are just 27% of the US House and 26% of the Senate, and only 18% of governors' mansions, there just aren't that many women that are there in those stepping stone positions. Why is that? Well, so few women run for office. And when they do run, they tend to wait until their children are grown up. Whereas a man might run for office for the first time, maybe at the local level in his 30s, a woman, when she runs for office for that first time, tends to be in her 40s or 50s, which then means she's going to have a much more abbreviated career and won't get up to that maybe US Senate position. So that is another key factor. You need to take my course. Those of you listening, Political Science and Women's Studies, 4420, Women in American Politics. We devote an entire semester to the whole complex of reasons why women are underrepresented. I am just so thrilled, however, that this one glass ceiling has been broken again to begin to normalize women at the pinnacle of American politics. And hopefully that will lead to more women being excited, picturing themselves and envisioning being involved politically and eventually running for office.
Thank you. It seems like there are more organizations dedicated to encouraging women to running for office too. Is that?
Yes, that is. You know, we had a Year of the Woman just in 2018, although I remember the Year of the Woman in 1992. So we get these punctuated periods in American political history where women run in big numbers. 1992 came on the heels of the Senate confirmation hearings of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court. So we'll remember those very high profile hearings in which a law professor, Anita Hill, came forward with a sexual harassment charge against the Supreme Court nominee, Clarence Thomas. And then in 2018, there was another surge of women running for president that came on the heels of Donald Trump's election as president and the very central role that gender issues played in the 2016 presidential nomination. So what I'd like to see is if we just continue to see more and more women, and eventually they just run as a matter of course, rather than after there is a big focusing event. Although I'm grateful that that's the silver lining when we have a focusing event that really calls into question women's place in the workforce, in the workplace, and issues of women's rights and so forth. The silver lining is it can be a real lightning rod to get women excited about running.
Thank you. So my next question is, how does Harris's multiple identities, woman, she identifies as Black, Indian American, she's a daughter of immigrants, those are some of the identities that she holds. How does that play into her role as VP? And Dr. Miller, if you would like to answer that, and if anybody else wants to chime in after, that would be great.
Yes, first let me say that those multiple identities were a factor in her being chosen. And that didn't surprise me at all. And in my view, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The number one reason anybody gets chosen as vice president is because of something they bring to the ticket, all right? So we think back to Barack Obama choosing Joe Biden to be his vice president. Joe Biden had that lengthy resume in Washington, D.C., a lot of foreign policy credentials that the ticket needed, that Barack Obama felt would help him get elected. Fast forward to 2016, Mike Pence was selected because Donald Trump needed to shore up his support among conservative evangelicals in the Republican Party. So now we look at Joe Biden's selection of Kamala Harris, and the fact that she was a woman, and a woman of color in particular, was a real nod and acknowledgement that women and people of color were absolutely essential to winning in November. So this pick in that regard was normal. She was picked because he felt that she would help him win. In terms of those identities going forward, one thing that we'll be looking for is how visible and how prominent of a vice president she is. In recent decades, vice presidents have been more active and been given more responsibilities by the president of the United States. We saw this with Joe Biden under Barack Obama. We saw this with Dick Cheney under George W. Bush and Al Gore under Bill Clinton. And so I hope that we will see Kamala Harris play a very visible role as a governing partner in this administration, because again, that the more visible she is, the more she is a role model, the more that normalizes women at the pinnacle of American politics. So I'll be interested in watching for what portfolio she has as vice president and whether it might dovetail with some of those multiple identities, whether she is put to work on issues of racial justice, which the President Biden has said are going to be important to his platform. On immigration, she is the daughter of immigrants. On issues that are so important to women in this country, like the minimum wage, like issues of affordable childcare and the like. So some of this remains to be seen, but at a minimum, if she's visible, she normalizes women and women of color in American politics, and I think will serve as an inspiration to women to hopefully run for office themselves.
Can I add something to that too? That's an amazing answer, but I also want to point out that for any of us who take or teach women's studies courses, that we often instruct undergraduates in the idea of intersectionality, as coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. And we think of intersectionality sometimes as being, here's how your identity markers interlace to increase oppression, basically. That someone, if they're a person of color, if they're a person of a non-masculine gender, that it can be a detriment to their success. But I think that in terms of deciding who he wanted to be his vice president, that Biden was looking at the fact that intersectionality can, as Dr. Miller said, help with representation and help the vice president speak to multiple constituencies. So I think that multiple constituencies can take inspiration from the new vice president's identity markers, and that those are all good things.
Absolutely.
And I agree with that, and I will build on that even further. I used as a reference point in my research Dr. Siddlewalker and Sneary, and they built upon research talking about the ethic of justice with Rawls and the ethic of care with Gilligan, and added to it, it's not just the male perspective we need to consider, it's not just the female position that we need to consider, we also need to add that diversity element into it. And when you ask a person who has been typically marginalized, you understand with a little bit greater depth. Instead of thinking, well, I believe this is what they need. No, it's an inclusive conversation that allows us to give our voice, lend our experiences, which makes the overall outcome better and it reaches a broader audience. And I'll give an example. There's a couple of different groups that Vice President Harris mentioned in her acceptance speech. And she talked about her experience within sorority life and what that means to the Divine Nine, which is the historically Black sororities and fraternities, and then also historically Black colleges and universities. That is a huge factions of hundreds of thousands of individuals who could individually vote, but the level of influence that permeates from that group is significant. And so that movement was expanded. So you have the female, you have the person of color, you have the educational background that sometimes had been underrated, saying they can't accomplish certain things, and it has been demonstrated to be inaccurate. And so with this accurate review of who was selected, who was able to show and share that these experiences of her life brought her to the point of being qualified and capable, it's significant, and it made all the difference in the election. So I agree exactly with what my colleague stated.
Thank you. I'm going to jump to a question because I think it relates to some of the things that you're talking about. Amanda Clayton, who's a political scientist at Vanderbilt University, said that women can either be seen as leaders or they can be seen as feminine, and the two don't go together. And so this classic double bind, how do we get past that? How do women who want to go into politics or who are in politics handle that? And Dr. Miller or Dr. DeBose?
Let me just say that for listeners to recall, one of the most prominent memories that many of us will have, and it's easy to Google, you can easily Google this and watch it on YouTube, and it was just shocking. But it really brought to millions of television viewers the double bind in like Technicolor. And that was a 2008 presidential debate between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, where one of the reporters on the stage pointed out in his question to Hillary Clinton, pointed out that New Hampshire voters did, according to the polls, think that she was more qualified to be president and had the experience necessary for the job, more so than her male competitors and Barack Obama in particular. The reporter then went on to say, however, that New Hampshire voters didn't like her as much as they liked Barack Obama, and would she like to respond to that? That was sort of the double bind in a nutshell, right? That, she had the qualities to be president, but she wasn't, it's another way of saying sort of like, you're not feminine enough, right? And I thought she gave a brilliant response and put on kind of a mock frown and said, well, that hurts my feelings, but I think I'll try to go on. And the audience laughed. Barack Obama said, as an aside, Hillary, you're likable enough. And that really, I think, gave a real visual to the double bind. One good bit of news I can report from the world of political science is that recent research on this question is suggesting that the double bind is not as pronounced as it used to be for women on the ballot. So there was an interesting study by Deborah Jordan Brooks of Dartmouth, and she did a series of experiments in which she asked voters to read a mocked up news article that she made look like an actual news article about a US Senate candidate. And there were different news articles that she used. One was about a candidate who broke down crying on the campaign trail. One was about a candidate who showed anger on the campaign trail. And then at random, the people who participated in this experiment, they only read about one candidate. They either read about a candidate named Karen, or they read about a candidate named Kevin. And that was the only difference in what these voters read about in terms of these candidate descriptions for US Senate. And guess what? There were no significant differences in how the candidates were rated. So she interpreted this as evidence that maybe we're not anymore penalizing women for appearing too feminine. Read that as sort of weak, not strong enough, right? Susceptible to crying, nor do they penalize women for being real strong as when they show anger on the campaign trail. So that's one of several studies in recent years that at least in politics, we are no longer penalizing women on the campaign trail when they rub up against that double bind. So I think there has been progress made.
And I will add to that because I remember watching the 4-part biopic of Hillary Clinton on one of the streaming sites. And one of the comments she made is, I wish I would have been more aggressive, but I was told that I should not come across harsh. And so in that moment, I think she believed that she could have changed the potential outcome if she would have followed her instinct versus the advisement that people give on what people are thinking and what people are writing. One of the things that we have to become more comfortable with as women and women of color is being our authentic selves. Because when we're taking on characteristics that are being pushed on us, it's not going to ring true. And so we should have the same rights to be authentically ourselves, to speak about things that are of value, speak of experiences that we've had from our lenses that will build more rapport with audiences that look like us or audiences that support difference. And so I think it's really important for us to be more conscious of controlling the narrative and not always responding to the questions that are being asked of us in a way that's a lose-lose situation, but redirecting the question to say, I appreciate the question you asked. Let me tell you this. And speaking the truth of what their capabilities, qualifications are, because you will be penalized if they think you're too feminine. You'll be penalized if they think you're too masculine. So just be your authentic self, which says you're qualified to do the work and speak to that instead of the emotions that are continually tried to be placed on us to have to respond to. So even though the individuals may ask an innocent question, it can be skewed. And so we have to make sure we're prepared for that.
If I could just add, because something you just said, Dr. DeBose, made me think of my own research. I have a project that I'm working on that involves women who ran for US House of Representatives in 2018. and I conducted in-depth interviews with 17 women who ran for US House of Representatives in 2018. All of them were mothers of young children, literally, with strollers on the campaign trail. The oldest children that some of these women had were junior high, but these were considered young children. And if there is a stereotypical marker of femininity, it is mothering. And what I found so striking is that these women really embraced their motherhood and ran as mothers in a way that political consultants used to tell candidates, particularly those that had young children, let's not put those in your campaign advertising at all. If you're going to be shown with children, they should be somebody else's children, right? Generic school children, right? But not your own children. And it was because the belief was that showing that feminine mothering side would trigger that harmful stereotype of women as too weak. Yet my study subjects in 2018 absolutely embraced and really foregrounded their motherhood. And to the letter, all 17 of them felt that being a mother helped them on the campaign trail. It made them seem more authentic. I mean, I think they were each being authentic, right? But they felt like it helped them to relate to voters on the campaign trail. It gave them something in common with so many voters to talk about the challenges of parenting. And I think there's an example whether rather than shying away from the double bind, as Clinton was told to do by her consultants in 2008, they very clearly, her pollster, Mark Penn, very famously told her that she needed to be more of the Iron Lady on the campaign trail, be more Margaret Thatcher on the campaign trail. And I think it wasn't until the waning days of her campaign in 2008 that she actually got Chelsea out on the campaign trail, got her own mother out on the campaign trail, and realized that it had probably been a mistake. So I really like the advice of being your authentic self. And as I said, I don't think that the penalties that we've seen surrounding that double bind, at least the research suggests, they are not as harsh as they used to be for women on the ballot.
Thank you. So I want to switch gears a little bit because there is another sort of historic first with this, and that is that we now have a second gentleman. And he actually has not been in the news too much. Except for when he kind of, I don't want to say famously, but when he charged the stage when somebody was jumping up on the stage when Kamala Harris was speaking. And so, while I don't necessarily want to center men in the discussion today, I do think that that is a pretty interesting thing to talk about with masculinity and how that plays out. So I was wondering, Dr. Kollman, and if you could maybe speak to that a little bit. And I have a follow-up question as well that I'll get to.
Sure. I think one of the reasons we don't see the new second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, being kind of getting expectations put on him is that he does have his own career. And I think there's something in the media that sort of presupposes that there's nothing particularly associated with the duties of the second spouse. Because when Dr. Jill Biden was second lady, there wasn't as much controversy surrounding her role. She was still working her job, et cetera. And I think that even though he is, he's got a first that he's doing as the first second gentleman, but there's not an expectation that he's going to have duties assigned to that. In my own research on popular culture representations of female presidency, there is traditionally this depiction of the first gentleman, if you're the husband of the first woman president, that you are going to experience some level of masculine angst about that, and that these depictions often include representation of that man making sure that his career is asserted as his own and separate from the presidency, either in terms of getting a new job or solidifying his career path, and that he's wholly incapable of performing the traditional duties of the First Lady, of being the White House hostess, and also of parenting the children if the president has children. So I don't know if there's simply the social and cultural expectation that as a man in this spousal role, that Mr. Emhoff is simply going to pursue his own career and not really engage with that, or that maybe there is some kind of anxiety there, but it's not really being presented publicly. But it is an interesting position. But the fact that he's not coming out with interviews expressing anything negative is, I think, a positive thing. When Elizabeth Dole ran for president, her husband was a bit publicly dubious and ambivalent about it. And I think that actually hurt her chances to secure the nomination when she was running. And I think it's also interesting that our first major party nominee who got farther along, Hillary Clinton, is the wife of a former president. So there was this sense that he's sort of retired from his own position, that he would be happy to serve as the first gentleman if she had won. And there wasn't really that same scrutiny. Other women who have run in the past have either been widowed or unmarried. Margaret Chase Smith was widowed, and there was no particular expectation that she was going to remarry. Shirley Chisholm was unmarried, and there was no real expectation that she was going to marry. So I think they got as far as they did because there wasn't that spousal baggage or expectation of what her husband would be doing.
And I'm also wondering if you all can talk a little bit about, sort of related to this, is related to Dr. Jill Biden and some of I'm sure you all have seen the op-ed that was in the Washington Post about whether or not she should be using her title of doctor. And so just any reflections on that, Dr. Kollman or Dr. DuBose?
Well, I think that one positive out of that op-ed was that there was a lot of immediate backlash against it. That I saw a lot of academics in sort of the academia Twitterverse were starting to put their honorifics and degrees in their Twitter bios, that were claiming not only women who have terminal degrees, but also men in education doctoral programs, that there was not only the supposition that she shouldn't be using it because it's an academic degree, but also there was a little bit of over questioning of it because it was an EDD, not a PhD. And there is some snobbery associated with that. And the criticism is extremely gendered, and it is extremely, it's coming from an older white man, the original op-ed. And I think, fortunately, that the backlash against him was pretty swift and decisive. For anybody who's ever pursued a higher degree, it's incredibly difficult, regardless of the degree type. And for her to continue working, I think, is also an inspiration. I'm proud as an English faculty member to have an English faculty member, in such close association with the executive branch. And I think that's great. I think it can only help. And I think she absolutely deserves to be using her honorific because she earned it.
If I can just add a couple of things, I think for all of us, boy, does it seem personal when Dr. Jill Biden was attacked so publicly for using doctor to self-describe, and as others have described her, just really awful. And I agree with everything Dr. Kollman said. I think I want to just also add, though, that the office of First Lady is just deeply problematic, and it has been for decades, in the sense that the occupant of that office is expected not to work, expected to work without pay, to be essentially the social secretary for the entire executive branch, or certainly the White House. So the duties of the First Lady, all have to do with event planning, Easter egg hunts, decorating the White House for Christmas, picking the menu for state dinners. I mean, these kinds of things. And what's happened is that as women have entered the workforce in ever greater number, and Dr. DuBose, I'm sure, can speak to this, there's just this real disconnect between the actual reality of most women's lives and that role of First Lady as being the helpmate, as being the social chair. So we saw a real backlash against Hillary Clinton in that role. back in 1992 when President Clinton named her to lead up his healthcare reform effort. There was an enormous backlash of that. Fast forward, I think something that happened interestingly in 2017 is that Melania Trump did not immediately move to the White House. And it was some months before she and her son Barron joined Donald Trump in the White House. And I remember at the time thinking, this might be a good thing in terms of the country can see, guess what? The Easter egg hunt is going to go on, right? You can hire any number of highly qualified party planners in the DC area to take care of some of this. So I think we've seen different first ladies, including Melania Trump, Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, and others address that role differently. Now we're going to see Doug Emhoff as the first, second gentleman. And I'm hoping that we will begin to see this uncoupling of this expectation that a first lady has to give up her career, has to take on this role of being the social chair for the White House, because I think it is so at odds with the reality of women's lives today.
You both said that perfectly. I think this goes along with what we talked about earlier, is breaking the tradition. And these are patterns of behavior that have made some feel very comfortable while making others feel uncomfortable. And it's okay to have change. And so as we have individuals who have their own personal lives, their academic pursuits, their careers, they're feeling as if I don't have to concede all that I have earned in order to make sure that I make way for those that are in leadership. So how Doug leads and how Dr. Jill Biden led, I think that sets a wonderful precedent on now it's time to create a new normal, which means the traditions of old have to go away. That breaks us through even further these barriers that tell us that we have to stay boxed in. And so as we move forward, I'm looking forward to seeing what additional growth happens.
Thank you. Dr. Kollman, I think your research is so fascinating, and I am wondering if you can share a little bit more about this piece of prior to the election, the only examples of that Americans had really, and you alluded to this a little bit ago, but the only examples that Americans had of president or vice president came from popular culture as far as women go in that role. So programs like Veep, if any of you have seen that, and Commander in Chief. So to what extent did movies and television shows help pave the way for Vice President Harris's election versus hinder the progress that she has made?
Well, the examples of female presidency that are in popular culture texts in the 20th century are overwhelmingly negative to varying degrees. There's not a lot of them up until about 2000. And most of my current research has focused on 20th century representations, and those have been incredibly problematic. Those that are actually shown as somewhat positive have still an air of the ridiculous around them. They're in either cartoons or comedies or pieces with a little bit of unreality about them. There's a science fiction movie, for example. So having certain genres be represented with a female president lends it an air of implausibility, whether or not that female president is shown as competent or not. And then as we get into deeper and into second wave feminism, the representations actually get more negative up until about the late 1990s. In the 1980s, we see several incredibly, I would say, direct pieces of backlash against women's pursuit of higher political power. We see comedies that are farces. We see there's a novel where the female president is insane, completely insane. And we see just generally a lot of this, what I alluded to before, of masculine angst, where the first gentleman is a little bit more centered than his wife, even though she's presumably, the one in more power, and that he is just endlessly full of a lot of complicated feelings around his wife having more political power than he does. So I think that these representations, even if they were designed to put the idea in the minds of the public and the audiences of women could achieve the presidency legally, it's a possibility, that it ended up having the perhaps deleterious consequence that it makes voters think negatively of the idea, even if that wasn't the creator's intent. Now, once we see getting into the 21st century, there's more representations. There's a ton of novels. And then, as you mentioned, Veep and Commander-in-Chief may be the most notable examples. But bear in mind, Commander-in-Chief, even though that was actually an overtly positive portrayal of a female president, it only lasted one season. And it was very much designed to be the female West Wing. And you can see a lot of commonalities between those two shows. And yet, unlike the West Wing, even though they're arguably of similar quality, Commander-in-Chief did not last nearly as long. And the main difference being this one is showing a female president, the West Wing is showing a male president. Veep, as wonderful as that show is and relatively high quality, she's not a competent leader at all. And similarly, House of Cards, we've got a high quality program, but the female president is, arguably duplicitous and has a lot of political machinations, and she's really out for herself. So they have been gaining in number, which I think does help normalize it as an idea. But in terms of whether the character is shown as a positive leader, we really haven't seen that too much. I will say there's several novels from the early 2000s that do show competent female presidential leadership. But unlike television and film, novels don't necessarily hit the zeitgeist as much. You don't necessarily have the wide audience as you do for visual media. So yeah, I mean, there's some really terrible examples out there that are almost humorously bad in their problematic nature. But I think we are getting into a phase where we're going to probably see more positive representations. There's a film that was in production before COVID with Jennifer Aniston as the president. And I think that that project is going to be a little female.
Thank you. I know that we are almost out of time here, so I want to just ask maybe one more question here, maybe two, and the last one, maybe you can just give me a couple of last thoughts. So we've been talking a lot about politics at the national level, but representation obviously is important at every level, and I think you all have talked about that throughout your questions here. But how do you all have any thoughts about having a woman and a woman of color at the VP level is going to affect us at a local level? And I'm wondering if Dr. Dubose and then Dr. Miller might give your quick thoughts.
As I stated earlier, representation is everything. And when you see someone that looks like you, it is an encouragement to say, I can accomplish this too. Let me look to see what it is that Vice President Harris has that allowed her to achieve this level of success. And how do I need to equip and prepare myself in order to be able to do that at a local level, because she had to start the same way any other politician traditionally starts. And so with that, it's important for us to make sure that we're developing those pipelines that Dr. Miller talked about, and making sure that we have mentors and sponsors that are able to help with that development. And some of the outcomes of the findings from the research that I did, and where I was interviewing highly successful women who were over major organizations and had achieved levels of experience being an African-American woman. And a lot of it talked about making sure that you're gaining the experience that you need, that you're having networking as a part of who you are and what you do on a regular basis, and not just touch points, but meaningful networking to say, how is it that I can be successful? Now, the benefit of having social media and technology the way we have it now, while you can have interpersonal relationships and having dynamic conversations, you also have the ability to research and watch footage of others that can help with your development. So if it's something that you're interested in doing, making sure that you're finding someone who can help sow into you information that can help with your growth and development And it doesn't just have to be from a woman. It can be from others who can assist in understanding the process. Doesn't mean that you have to follow it exactly, but getting that historical understanding and seeing what you can build and how you can navigate through that process to make the change that you're wanting to make. So I think part of it is making sure that you have this fortitude, this courage to strike out and do something that's different, understanding that you may not be a part of the majority number-wise, but you can be a part of the change that does happen. And so as long as we're willing to nurture one another, we all have different skill sets. We all have different types of research, but our backgrounds and what we have to contribute all are factors that can assist someone or many in being able to reach their personal goals. And so I think that's the value of having a variety of lenses at the table, experiences, knowledge bases, because it all works together.
My internet was struggling a little bit when you were posing the question. I think I understand what it was. And I will just say that I think it may be some time before we see the effect of having Vice President Harris in that very visible national role, as well as other women at the national level continue to be in the spotlight. So we might think on the Democratic side, of course, about Speaker Nancy Pelosi. We might think on the Republican side of Representative Lynn Cheney, the #3 Republican in the House of Representatives. And so to the extent that there are women at the national level in prominent positions, it has this effect of young girls, young women, and all women really, of beginning to visualize themselves. So there may be a little bit of a delay, but I'm happy to report that women, I should say girls who are in their preteens, their teen years now, watching the inauguration today, watching the next 4 years, there's going to come a point when they don't remember that the US ever didn't have a vice president who was a woman, right? So sometimes it takes some time, but I think what we can all hope for is that more girls and young women and women in general, women from diverse backgrounds, women from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, do enter public office because, as we've alluded to throughout today's conversation, women bring a different voice to the table. And it's a voice that needs to be part of the conversation. Men and women have different leadership styles. So it does make a difference if women are represented at the table, represented at those highest echelons of public life. So there may be a little bit of a delay, but at the local level, I'm looking forward to seeing it become that half the candidates who run for mayor are women. Half the candidates who throw their hat in the ring for Congress are women. That women aren't the anomaly that they have for so long been on the ballot.
Thank you. Are there any other final thoughts that you all would like to share?
I'll just share one quick one, which is if listeners out there want to accelerate the advancement of women in politics, it's very easy for you to take action. Just ask a woman to run for office, whether that's local office, so whether it's city council or school board or mayor or county commissioner. Women are much more likely to run for office if they're asked to do so. Men are much more likely to just take it upon themselves to run and not wait to be asked. It's an important ingredient in getting women on that ballot is that they get recruited by others. So that's something we can all do, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. We need women, if we're ever going to get to parity, get women in those pipeline positions that will lead to a woman elected president someday. We need women in these lower level offices with the years it takes to get to the US Senate or get into a governor's mansion so that one day we can have a woman president of the United States.
And I'll make a quick comment. Businesses are a microcosm of our government. And it's important, and from my human resources lens, it's important for us to ensure that when we are in positions that allow us to have influence, to use that influence to make sure that we're not just talking about diversity, we're not just talking about belonging or inclusion, and we're not just placing something on our website because it looks fantastic, but mobilizing it to make sure that there are provisions that are made to make these things move forward to bring equity into the workplace more fully. So that means that we have to put the money and the resources to make that happen. And understanding that it's not just the function of one department and division, it has to be the responsibility of everyone that is employed with an organization to say, this is the part that I am accountable to do to make these changes. And the best way to do that is policy development, but beyond that is including it in essential functions where that any individual that is in leadership that's responsible for hiring, whether it's internally or externally, they are measured about how they're moving forward the goals of the organization. If there's a measure in place, then action will happen. It's easy to take action. You have to just do it.
I want to add too that taking action and encouraging real life political movement and women in business, that if you're an artist and you feel like art isn't activism, art absolutely is activism. Because as Dr. DeBose said multiple times, representation matters. So if we have better representations of women in political power, I think that it will continue to help normalize it to audiences. So if you're an author, content creator, or even just some kind of influencer and you want to amplify the voices of people doing this kind of work well, use your position, use your power, use your voice to do that.
Thank you. Those calls to action, I think, are exactly what I was hoping to hear. And I think it's a great way to wrap this program up. So I want to thank you all again. I know that everyone is incredibly busy, and I feel like I got so much out of this conversation personally. So I know that everyone else will as well. And I also want to just let anyone know that's watching this on, we will be doing a follow-up Instagram Live on January 27th on the Center for Women and Gender Equity Instagram page at 12:30 in the afternoon. So if you have questions that you want to ask, I'm going to be on there, and just a little bit of a follow-up to this program. So again, thank all of you so much for being here. This is an exciting time. It's a challenging time. And I hope that everyone has a fantastic day. And thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.